The scanner started screaming at me before I even finished my first cup of coffee, and in my line of work, a screaming scanner means one of two things. Either I was about to get rich, or I was about to get killed. Most days it was neither. Most days it was just a broken satellite or a chunk of frozen fuel drifting through the dark. But that morning, floating alone in the wreckage of what used to be a royal convoy, the scanner was telling me something impossible. It was telling me that somewhere in that graveyard of twisted metal, something was still alive. My name is Marcus Cole. I used to be a soldier. Now I pick through the bones of dead ships and sell whatever I find. It is not a proud life, but it is a quiet one, and after the war, quiet was all I wanted. My ship is called the Second Chance, which tells you everything you need to know about me. She is old, she is ugly, and she keeps flying when she has no business flying. We have that in common. The debris field stretched out in front of my window like a frozen storm. 6 ships, all of them Velnari, all of them torn apart. The Velnari are a graceful people, tall and silver-skinned, with eyes like deep water. Their ships look like works of art, all smooth curves and shining crystal. Seeing them broken like this felt wrong, the way it feels wrong to see a cathedral burn down. Somebody had attacked a diplomatic convoy. Somebody had attacked it hard, fast, and without mercy, and then they had left without taking anything. That was the part that bothered me. Pirates steal, raiders steal. Whoever did this wanted only one thing, and it was not cargo. The life sign was faint, a whisper of heat and heartbeat buried deep in the wreck of the largest ship. I checked the reading 3 times because I did not believe it. The attack had happened days ago. The air in these wrecks was long gone. Nothing should have survived. But the scanner does not lie, and my mother did not raise a man who could fly away from a dying heartbeat, no matter how much trouble it smelled like. I pulled on my suit, grabbed my cutting torch, and pushed off into the dark. Floating through a dead ship is a strange thing. Papers drift past you like snow. Personal things tumble in the silence. A cup, a child's toy, a musical instrument with its strings still trembling from some old vibration. I moved through the corridors by torchlight, following the signal, trying not to look too closely at the shapes floating in the shadows. The crew had not made it. None of them. I have seen a lot of terrible things in my life, but the silence of that ship pressed on me like a weight. The signal led me to the heart of the vessel, to a sealed section behind a door that had been welded shut from the outside. That stopped me cold. Welded from the outside. Somebody had locked this room on purpose. Somebody had put a living being inside and sealed the door. And that meant this was not a survivor of the attack. This was a prisoner, or a victim. My torch bit through the weld line, throwing sparks that died instantly in the vacuum. It took me 20 minutes to cut through, and my heart hammered the entire time, because the life sign on my wrist display was getting weaker with every minute. Whoever was in there, they were running out of time, and they were running out of it fast. The door came free and I pulled myself inside. It was an escape pod bay, and one single pod remained, its small window fogged from the inside. Fogged meant breath. Breath meant life. I wiped the glass with my glove and looked in, and everything I thought I knew about my quiet little salvage run fell apart in a single second. There was a Velnari woman inside the pod, young, silver-skinned, with the deep blue markings across her face that I had only ever seen in news broadcasts and history books. Royal markings. The crest of the crystal throne was etched into the collar she wore. I was looking at Princess Sylara of the Velnari, heir to an empire of 40 worlds, and she was dying right in front of me. Her wounds were the second thing I noticed, and they made my blood run cold. They were not from the attack, they were precise, deliberate. Someone had hurt her carefully, and then sealed her in this pod with just enough air to make her death slow. This was not war. This was an execution, and whoever had done it wanted her to suffer first. I have made a lot of decisions in my life by thinking them through carefully. This was not one of them. I hauled that pod out of the bay, dragged it through the dead ship, and got it aboard the Second Chance faster than I have ever moved in my life. My hands were shaking as I sealed my airlock and pressurized the cargo hold. The pod's release was jammed, so I broke it open with a pry bar, and the moment the seal cracked, her eyes opened. I will never forget that moment. Her eyes were the color of a sunrise over water, gold and pink and impossibly deep, and they were filled with the purest terror I have ever seen on any face, human or otherwise. She looked at me, a rough, unshaven human in a battered suit, and she made a sound like the whole universe had come to end her personally. She tried to push herself away from me, weak as she was, pressing herself against the back of the pod, whispering something in her own language over and over. My translator caught it after a few seconds and fed it into my ear, and I finally understood. The death that walks. She was calling me the death that walks. I knew the phrase. Everybody in known space knows it now. It is what the other species started calling humans after the war, after we did the things we did to survive against the hegemony of Kes. Their scholars write about us. Their holy books warn about us. To most of the galaxy, humans are the monster under the bed, the species that should have died 100 times and refused, the species that fought a war against an empire 10 times its size and somehow, impossibly, won. She was not looking at a rescuer. She was looking at a nightmare from her scriptures. I sat back on my heels, kept my hands where she could see them, and did the only thing I could think of. I talked to her the way you talk to a frightened animal, low and slow and steady. I told her my name. I told her she was on my ship and that nobody was going to hurt her. I told her I was going to treat her wounds and that she could hold my pry bar and hit me with it if I did anything she did not like. I even offered her my coffee, which in hindsight was a strange choice, but I was improvising. She did not take the coffee. She did take the pry bar, gripping it with both trembling hands, watching me with those sunrise eyes while I opened my medical kit. Here is something most species do not know about human field medicine. We improvise. Alien doctors follow ancient doctrines, perfect procedures for perfect conditions. Human medics learned their trade in mud and fire, patching bodies together with whatever was in reach. So when my scanner told me her blood chemistry was different from mine, I did not give up. I adapted. I mixed what I had. I improvised a treatment from 3 different kits and a prayer, and when the pain finally left her face, when her breathing finally steadied, she stared at me like I had performed a miracle. "Your medicine should not work on me," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, but it was beautiful, like music played on an instrument I had never heard before. "That is not possible." "Lady," I said, "my whole species is not possible. Ask anybody." And then, for just a moment, through the fear and the pain and the grief, she almost smiled. Almost. It was the smallest thing, a flicker at the corner of her mouth, but I felt like I had won a medal. She told me her name, though I already knew it. She told me she had been betrayed, though she would not yet say by whom. Every time she came close to speaking of it, her hands started shaking and her eyes went somewhere far away, and I knew that look. I have worn that look. So I did not push. I made her soup from my emergency rations, which she examined like a scientist studying an alien artifact, and I gave her my bunk, and I sat in the pilot's seat all night watching the stars and wondering what kind of storm I had just pulled aboard my ship. I got my answer at dawn, ship time, when my proximity alarm went off like the end of the world. 3 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel less than 1,000 kilometers away, close enough that their arrival lit up my entire viewport. They were Kes vessels, hegemony military, sharp and black and bristling with weapons, and they had no business being anywhere near Velnari space. My blood turned to ice water as my communication panel lit up with an incoming broadcast on all channels. The voice was cold and smooth, the voice of someone used to being obeyed. "Unidentified salvage vessel," it said. "Our scans show you have taken something from this debris field. You are carrying the remains of a traitor to the Velnari crown. You will surrender the body of the princess immediately. Comply, and you will be permitted to leave with your ship and your life. Refuse, and you will join this debris field. You have 5 minutes." I looked back toward the cargo hold. Silara was standing in the doorway, wrapped in my spare blanket, and she had heard every word. Her face had gone pale silver, and her hands were pressed against her mouth, and in her eyes I saw something worse than fear. I saw someone who had already accepted that she was going to die, and who was only sorry that I would die with her. "Give me to them," she whispered. "Please. You saved me once. Do not lose your life for it. You do not even know me." I turned back to my controls. I took a long, slow sip of my cold coffee, and I felt something wake up inside me that had been asleep for a very long time. Something from the war. Something with teeth. "They think you are dead," I said. "They came all this way to collect a body." I reached over and started warming up engines that had not run hot in years. "So let us show them what humans do with people who hurt the wounded and threaten the helpless. Strap in, princess. You are about to learn why they wrote about us in your holy books." The 5 minutes they gave me lasted exactly 40 seconds, because that is how long it took them to realize I was not slowing down to surrender. I was speeding up. Every species in the galaxy has tactical doctrine. The Kess have libraries full of it. Their commanders study for decades, memorizing the correct response to every possible situation. And that is exactly why I knew I could beat them, because there is no chapter in any of their books that covers what a stubborn human does when he is angry, outnumbered, and flying a ship held together with tape and spite. Scylla had strapped herself into the seat beside me, still wrapped in my blanket, her long silver fingers gripping the armrests. She was watching the 3 warships grow larger on the display, and her voice came out very small. "They will expect you to run for open space," she said. "It is what any sane pilot would do." "Good thing I am not one of those," I said, and I turned the second chance directly toward the debris field. She made a sound that my translator refused to interpret. I think it was a prayer. Here is the thing about a debris field that military minds hate. It is chaos. Thousands of pieces of wreckage, all spinning, all drifting, all deadly. Warship sensors struggle in there. Weapons lock becomes a nightmare. No trained commander takes capital ships into that mess, because the doctrine says it is an unacceptable risk. So while the Kess ships slowed at the edge of the field, arguing with their own rulebooks, I threaded my ugly little ship straight into the heart of the storm. Wreckage flashed past my windows close enough to touch. I rolled us under the broken spine of a cruiser, cut between 2 spinning hull plates that clapped together behind us like hands, and dove into the shadow of the largest wreck in the field. Scylla had both hands over her eyes. I probably should have too, but one of us had to fly. Then I did the thing that no doctrine on any world would ever recommend. I shut everything down. Engines, dead. Heat vents, flushed and closed. Lights, life support fans, even the coffee maker, all of it silent. I fired the magnetic clamps and locked the second chance against the hull of the dead cruiser, like a barnacle on a whale, and then we were just another piece of cold metal in a field full of cold metal. Invisible, silent, a hole in space. Scylla lowered her hands slowly. She looked at the dead controls, then at me, and her sunrise eyes were enormous. "You are hiding," she whispered, "from 3 warships, by pretending to be garbage." "I have been pretending to be garbage for 6 years, I whispered back. "I am very good at it." And for the second time since I had met her, she almost smiled. We stayed like that for 11 hours. The Kess ships prowled the edges of the field, sweeping their sensors through the wreckage, and twice their searchlights passed directly over our hull. Both times I held my breath like they could hear me breathing through the vacuum, which is foolish, but fear does not care about physics. Both times, the light moved on. To their scanners, we were dead metal on dead metal. Doctrine told them no ship would ever do what we had done, and so they believed their own doctrine over their own eyes. It was in those long, dark hours, floating in the silence with only the glow of my emergency lamp between us, that Scylla finally told me the truth. She talked quietly, with long pauses, the way people talk about wounds that have not closed. The convoy had been a peace mission, she said. Her father, the emperor, was dying, and she was his only heir. She had been traveling to a summit to reject a treaty, a terrible treaty, one that would have opened Velnari space to the hegemony of Kess, given them bases, harbors, and control of the trade lanes. Her people had watched what the hegemony did to its neighbors. She would not let that happen to her worlds. She had said so publicly, loudly, and 3 days later, her convoy was ambushed by ships that knew her exact route, her exact schedule, and her exact escape procedures. Only one person outside the royal household had access to all of that, she said, and her voice cracked for the first time. My uncle, Chancellor Vorth, my father's own brother. He stood at my side at every ceremony. He taught me to read star charts when I was a child, and he sold me to the Kess-like cargo. She described what came next in a flat, careful voice, and I will not repeat all of it. Her own guards, bought and turned, the room they sealed her in, her uncle's face on the screen as he explained, so politely, that she would officially die a hero, mourned by billions, while he wept beautifully at her funeral and signed everything the hegemony wanted. He had wanted her to know all of it before the end. That was his gift to her, the truth, and then the slow dark. When she finished, my hands hurt. I looked down and found them clenched so hard my knuckles had gone white. I made myself breathe. There is an anger I learned to control during the war, a cold and patient kind, and I felt it settling into my bones like an old friend coming home. He made one mistake, I said. She looked up at me. What mistake? He left you breathing in a galaxy where I was passing by. Something changed in her face when I said that. The fear that had been living in her eyes since the pod opened. The fear of me, of my species, of the death that walks. It shifted into something else. Something curious. She pulled my blanket tighter around her shoulders and studied me the way a scholar studies a text that contradicts everything she was taught. The stories about humans, she said slowly. They say you feel no fear, that you cannot be stopped, that you took apart the greatest war fleet the hegemony ever built, with ships that were falling apart around you. My tutors said your kind survives things that should be impossible, radiation that would end us, gravity that would crush us, injuries that would kill any civilized being. They said it as a warning, stay away from humans. Most of that is exaggerated, I said. We feel plenty of fear. We just do not let it drive. And the rest of it? I shrugged. The rest of it is Tuesday. She actually laughed then. It burst out of her before she could stop it, a bright, startled sound in the darkness of my dead ship, and she immediately looked horrified, as though laughing while hiding from warships was a crime. Maybe on her world it was. On my ship, it was the best sound I had heard in years. For the next few hours she interviewed me. There is no other word for it. She asked about human bones and why they heal stronger after breaking. She asked about our hearts, our history, our terrible food, our habit of taming predators and calling them good boys. She took notes on a broken data slate she found in my storage locker, writing in flowing Velnari script, and when I asked her why, she said that if she lived through this, she intended to correct her people's books. I found it annoying. I also found myself answering every single question, and somewhere in that long night, hiding in the dark from people who wanted her dead, we stopped being a stranger and a stranger. We became something like friends. Then my proximity sensor, running on its last whisper of battery power, gave a single soft chirp. I was at the panel in a heartbeat. Something had landed on our wreck. Not near it, on it. I switched the external camera to passive mode and watched a Kess assault shuttle settle onto the broken hull of the cruiser we were clamped against, close enough that I could count the scratches on its landing gear. Its hatch opened, and figures in black armored suits drifted out into the vacuum. 8 of them. They moved in perfect formation, weapons ready, sweeping the wreck section by section. They were not searching for salvage, they were searching for survivors. And in about 20 minutes, their search pattern was going to bring them right to the strange, unmarked little ship, clamped to the hull like a barnacle. Sylara saw them on the screen and went very still. Not panicked, still. The stillness of someone who has already been through the worst moment of her life and has decided how she will face the next one. She lifted her chin, and I saw generations of royalty in that small movement. "I will not be taken back," she said quietly. "Whatever happens, I will not go back into a small dark room. Tell me how I can help you." And that, right there, is the moment I stopped protecting her because it was right, and started protecting her because she had earned it. I went to the locker at the back of my cabin. The locked one. The one I had welded a promise onto 6 years ago, and sworn never to open, because the man who used the things inside it was someone I had worked very hard to leave behind in the war. My hands hovered over the lock for a moment. Just a moment. Then I thought about a room sealed from the outside, and a dying girl left in the dark by her own family, and 8 armed figures walking across the hull toward her, and the lock came apart under my fingers like it had been waiting. Inside was my old armor, scarred and gray, still fitting like a memory. Inside was my old rifle, heavy and patient. I handed Silara a small pistol and showed her the 2 things she needed to know: which end faces the trouble and where the safety lives. She took it with steady hands, this princess who had been raised on music and diplomacy, and she asked me one question. "Those stories in our holy books," she said, "about your kind, about what happens when humans decide to protect something, are they true?" I sealed my helmet and picked up my rifle, and through the speaker, my voice came out sounding like it used to sound, back when it belonged to Sergeant Cole instead of a tired salvage man. "Stay behind me," I said, "and you are about to find out." The airlock cycled in total silence, and I stepped out onto the hull of a dead ship with my heart beating slow and cold, the way it always did before things went loud. Vacuum combat is a different world. There is no sound, there is no up or down. There is only movement and stillness, light and shadow, and the terrible patience of people trying to end each other in a place where a single torn suit means the end of everything. The Kess soldiers were trained for it. Their formation was textbook perfect, 4 pairs sweeping the wreck in overlapping arcs, never leaving a blind spot, never breaking pattern. Textbook perfect. That was their whole problem. I had read their textbook. During the war, we all had. And the first rule of fighting the Kess is simple. Do not be where the textbook says you will be. The textbook says a defender protects his ship. So I left mine. I pushed off the hull and drifted away from the second chance, out into the tangle of wreckage, moving with the debris instead of against it. Just one more slow shape among 10,000 slow shapes. My suit was old and gray and scratched, the same color as dead metal. I had turned off every light, every transmitter, everything but the air in my lungs and the plan in my head. The first pair of soldiers passed within 10 meters of me and never saw me because their helmets were pointed at my ship, exactly where the textbook told them to look. I did not want to hurt anyone. I want that understood. 6 years I had kept my hands clean, and I intended to keep them that way if the universe allowed it. So I fought the way old soldiers fight when they are tired of loss, with the environment, with surprise, with their heads. I reached the ruptured fuel line I had spotted from my cockpit hours earlier, a great torn artery of the dead cruiser, still holding pressure behind an emergency valve. I waited until the first pair drifted into the open stretch of hull below it, and then I put one round through that valve. Frozen gas erupted outward in a silent white geyser, a storm with no sound, and it took both soldiers off the hull like leaves in a flood. They tumbled away into the debris field, unhurt but helpless, spinning end over end, their formation broken, their careful pattern gone. In a vacuum, if you cannot reach a surface, you cannot stop. They would drift until their shuttle came to collect them, furious and embarrassed and completely out of my way. 2 down, 6 left, and now the 6 knew something was hunting them. Here is where the difference between species truly shows. When Kess soldiers face the unexpected, they regroup. They fall back on doctrine, tighten formation, and wait for orders. It is disciplined. It is sensible. It is also slow, and slow is a language humans have never spoken. Before their squad leader had finished barking his regroup command, I was already gone, moving through a torn corridor inside the wreck itself, cutting through the ship's dead heart while they watched its skin. I came up through a maintenance hatch behind their second pair. I did not use my rifle. I used the wreck. A cargo net, cut loose at exactly the right moment, blossomed open in the void and tangled them like fish, their weapons pinned against their own chests. I sent them drifting after their friends with a gentle push. Somewhere behind my helmet, I heard myself apologize to them out of pure habit, which they could not hear and would not have believed. 4 left, and now they were afraid. I could see it in their movement. The perfect formation had collapsed into a tight, nervous cluster near their shuttle. Their helmet lights swept the wreckage in fast, jerky arcs. They had come here to collect a body from a pod, an errand, a formality, and instead something out of their grandmother's warnings was taking their squad apart piece by piece, without leaving a mark on any of them. I knew what they were thinking, because their war stories had taught them to think it. Human. There is a human in the dark. Their squad leader made the smart call, the one the textbook demands. He ordered a retreat to the shuttle, and he almost made it work, except that when they turned toward their shuttle, I was already standing on top of it. I want to tell you I planned what happened next, but the truth is that the 4th soldier panicked. He was young. I could see it in the way he moved, all speed and no control, and when he saw me silhouetted against the stars, he fired wild and tore a line of holes through his own shuttle's engine housing. The blast of escaping propellant caught him and threw him against the hull hard enough to crack his suit's seals. His air began to spill out of him in a fine silver mist, and his squad, following doctrine, following orders, following the cold arithmetic of a retreat under fire, left him. They actually left him. 3 of them piled into the crippled shuttle and blasted away on emergency power, abandoning their own man to die on a dead ship because the manual said the mission comes first. I watched the shuttle stagger off into the dark, and then I looked down at the young soldier thrashing on the hull, grabbing at the mist of his own escaping air, dying by centimeters, and every rule of the war I had fought said to let it happen. He was the enemy. His people had hurt Silara. His people had hurt mine. I was moving before I finished the thought. I reached him in 3 long pulls along the hull, pinned his flailing arms, and slapped an emergency patch from my belt over the crack in his suit. Then a second one, because the first was bubbling. His faceplate was centimeters from mine, and through it I could see his eyes, huge and terrified and young, so young, staring at the nightmare of his people as it saved his life with its own hands. "Why?" he kept saying, once his radio found my frequency. "Why? You are human." "Why?" "Because you were dying," I said, "and nobody deserves to die alone in the dark. I have strong opinions on the subject." His name was Kret. He was 19 years old by his people's counting, drafted out of a farming colony, 8 months in uniform. When I brought him aboard the Second Chance, sealed and secured, and utterly bewildered, Silara nearly fainted, then nearly shot him, then, being who she was, brought him soup instead. I am telling you, there is something about that woman and soup. And Kret, warming his hands on a human ration cup, staring between the princess who was supposed to be dead and the human who had refused to let him die, made a decision that changed everything. He talked. He told us his squad's real orders. Confirm the death of Princess Silara of the Velnari, and remove any witnesses. He told us the ambush of the convoy had been carried out by hegemony military ships flying without markings, on the direct invitation of Chancellor Vorth. He told us the treaty signing was already scheduled. And then he told us the thing that made the deck feel unsteady under my feet. His shuttle's flight computer, the crippled one his squad had escaped in, was the backup. The primary data core had been left behind on the wreck for retrieval, and it contained the mission logs, orders, names, codes, Vorth's own transmissions, recorded and stored because the hegemony documents everything. It is doctrine. We found the core exactly where he said it would be, a black cylinder no bigger than my forearm, sitting in a mounting cradle on the ruined shuttle pad. Silara held it in both hands like it was made of light. Inside that cylinder was her uncle's treason, recorded in his own voice, enough proof to burn his lies to the ground in front of 40 worlds. "We have him," she breathed. "Marcus, we have him. If my people hear these recordings, if the noble houses see this, he is finished. The treaty is finished. All I have to do is reach the capital alive." "All you have to do," I repeated. "Sylara, the capital is his fortress. He controls your fleet, your guards, your news, and by now, your funeral arrangements. We would be flying into the one place in the galaxy where everyone with a weapon has orders about you." She turned to me, and the frightened girl from the escape pod was nowhere in her face. What stood in my cargo hold was an empress in a borrowed blanket, and when she spoke, her voice rang like struck crystal. "They are my people, Marcus. He is starving them of the truth. Every day I hide is a day he builds his lie taller. I did not survive that pod so that I could be safe. I survived it so that I could go home." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I looked at Kret, who to my astonishment stood up, put down his soup, and said that he was coming too, because his people had made him a criminal the moment they made him part of this, and he would rather be a traitor to a lie than loyal to one. "Kids, they will break your heart." So we went. 3 days of hard flying, the second chance rattling like a toolbox thrown down the stairs, while Sylara taught me the layout of the royal city, and I taught her how to move like someone who expects trouble, and Kret unlocked every KES code and signal protocol he knew. 3 days of her sitting beside me in the co-pilot seat during the quiet shifts, telling me about her father, her mother's garden, the sea of glass on her homeworld that sings when the wind crosses it. 3 days of me, fool that I am, realizing that somewhere between a debris field and a throne world, this had stopped being a rescue. I was not taking her somewhere. I was following her. On the 3rd night, ship time, she found me checking my old armor for the 10th time and sat down across from me and asked, very quietly, why I had really left the war. And for the first time in 6 years, I told someone. I told her about my squad. I told her about the ones I brought home and the ones I could not, and about how a man can win every battle and still lose everything he was fighting for, and how afterward the quiet of deep space was the only voice I could stand to hear. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say it would be all right. She just took my scarred hand in both of her silver ones and held it, and we sat like that while the stars went by, and it was the most healing thing anyone had done for me since the day the war ended. We reached her home system on the 4th day, running silent, drifting in behind a merchant convoy with our transponder whispering a false name that Kret had built for us. Her world rose up in my viewport, blue and silver and crowned with orbital gardens, the most beautiful planet I have ever seen, and for one shining moment I let myself believe the hard part was over. Then the merchant convoy's escort ships changed course. All of them. At once. Kret saw it before I did, and the sound he made told me everything. "It was a trap," he said, his voice cracking. "The false name, the codes, they knew. They must have changed the protocols after my squad reported in. Marcus, they knew we were coming." The sky filled with light. Interceptors rose from the planet like sparks from a fire, dozens of them, and a voice on the royal channel, smooth and cold and horribly familiar to Sylara, ordered all defenses to destroy the smuggler vessel violating sacred space. Her uncle's voice, welcoming her home. I did everything a pilot can do. I threw the second chance through maneuvers that should have torn her apart, dove through their firing lines, skipped us off the top of the atmosphere in a wall of flame. My brave, ugly, faithful old ship fought for every kilometer, engines screaming, hull glowing, alarms singing their terrible chorus, and she got us through the fleet, all the way down, into the clouds above the capital itself. And then a lucky shot found her heart, and the engines died, and the ground came up to meet us, and the last thing I heard before the world turned to thunder was Sylara calling my name. I woke to smoke and rain, and the wrong kind of silence. The second chance lay broken in a public garden on the edge of the royal city. Her spine snapped, her flying days finished forever. Kret was dragging me out of the wreckage with a gash across his forehead, shouting words that took far too long to reach my ringing ears. When they finally arrived, I was on my feet before my body agreed to it, because the words were these. The soldiers took her. Marcus, they took her. She is gone. And above us, on every tower in that shining city, giant screens flickered to life with an announcement to 40 worlds. The traitor princess, miraculously alive, captured attempting to invade the sacred capital with foreign agents. Trial concluded, sentence pronounced. At dawn, in the plaza of the Crystal Throne, before the eyes of the whole empire and the honored guests of the hegemony of Kes, Silara of the Vel Naari would be publicly put to death by her own uncle's hand. The rain ran down my face, and the fire from my dead ship warmed my back, and I stood in the ruins of everything with 19-year-old Kret looking at me the way soldiers look at sergeants when the plan is gone and the night is coming. Dawn, I said. That gives us 9 hours. 9 hours to do what? He asked. We have no ship, no army, no allies on this whole planet. I picked my rifle out of the wreckage and wiped the mud from it, and I felt the old, cold anger settle over my shoulders like a coat made for me long ago. Wrong, I said. She is on this planet. As long as she is breathing, I have all the allies I need. Now walk with me, kid, and I will show you the one thing about humans that nobody's holy book ever got right. Hiding in a city where your face means terror is a strange kind of education. We moved through the rain-soaked streets of the royal capital with my hood pulled low and my heart hammering, because there is no disguise in the galaxy that hides what a human is. Our shape gives us away. Our walk gives us away. The Vel Naari drift when they move, graceful as water, and I move like a man who has carried heavy things up hills his whole life. Every time we passed under a streetlight, I waited for the scream, the alarm, the running feet. The scream never came. What came instead broke something open in my chest, and I am not ashamed to say it. The first was a baker, an old Vel Naari man with flour on his hands, closing up his shop as a patrol swept the street behind us with searchlights. He took one look at me, one long look with those deep-water eyes, and I braced myself for the worst. Instead, he opened his back door and jerked his head toward the warmth inside, and when the patrol had passed, he pressed bread into my hands and whispered 4 words that I will carry to my grave. You came for her. Word travels in occupied cities. It always has, on every world, in every age. The official broadcasts called Silara a traitor, but the people had watched her grow up. They had seen her open hospitals and argue for the poor districts and stand in the rain at memorial services when her uncle stayed dry inside. They did not believe the screens, and now the whisper was running through the lower city faster than any patrol could chase it. The princess lives. A human fell from the sky beside her. The death that walks has come, and he is walking for her. The old stories, Kret murmured as we moved from shelter to shelter, passed hand to hand by strangers who risked everything to hide us. He was hearing the whispers too, his translator catching fragments from doorways and cellar stairs. Marcus, do you know what they are saying? They are saying their scriptures always had a second verse about your kind, one the temples stopped reading during the war. The death that walks comes only for the guilty, for the innocent. He stands and does not move. I did not know what to say to that. I am not a legend. I am a tired man with bad knees and a rifle older than Kret, and the weight of what these people believed about me was heavier than any armor. But legends are load-bearing. People will hold up impossible things if a story gives them somewhere to stand, so I stood straighter, for them, and I got to work. A seamstress hid us in her cellar, and it was there, by the light of a sewing lamp, that I did the thing I had sworn 6 years ago I would never do. Her communication rig was old but honest, and Kret rewired it to reach the deep relays, and I sat down in front of it and opened a channel on a frequency that does not exist in any registry. An old coalition band, a soldier's band, the one we all promised to keep listening to, on the day they took our uniforms and sent us home to be civilians. I did not call a government. Governments hold meetings. I did not call a fleet. Fleets need orders. I called people. "This is Reaper," I said, and my voice only shook a little on the old call sign. "Sergeant Marcus Cole, 3rd Assault, Coalition Marines, retired. I am on the Vel-Nari throne world, and I am calling in everything. All of it. Every favor, every debt, every promise made in every foxhole. There is a girl here who did nothing wrong, and at dawn they are going to kill her in front of the whole galaxy to start a war her people do not want. I cannot stop it alone. I have no right to ask. I am asking anyway. If you ever trusted me, come now and come loud." Then I sent it, unencrypted, into the deep dark, and I sat back, and I waited, and I honestly did not know if anything would come back except silence. 6 years is a long time. People build lives. People forget. People do not forget. Not my people. The first reply came in 19 minutes. A gravelly voice I had last heard singing badly in a mess hall on a moon whose name I am still not allowed to say. "Reaper, you absolute fool, this is Tanner. I run freight out of the border stations now. I have a cargo hauler with a stripped hold and engines I never reported to customs, and I can be there by dawn. Who else is coming?" The second reply came from a hospital ship matron named Ruth, who had once dragged 3 of my men out of a burning transport with her bare hands. The third was my old squad medic, Owen, who did not even ask questions, just transmitted his arrival time and the single word, "Finally." Then came a mining captain who owed me for a customs problem, and 2 brothers, Sam and Peter, who flew racing ships now and had apparently been bored out of their minds for years, and old Corporal Hayes, and a salvage crew from the outer belt, and more, voices out of my past lighting up that ancient frequency one after another, like campfires answering each other across a dark valley. No warships, no soldiers, not anymore, just haulers and miners, and medics and racers, and one retired demolition specialist named Edith, who was, in her own words, delighted to be needed again. 14 ships of ordinary, stubborn, magnificent people, dropping their lives and burning their fuel reserves to cross the dark for a stranger, because one of their own had asked. Kret watched the replies come in with tears running freely down his face, and he did not wipe them away. "My people have a fleet of 9,000 warships," he said quietly, "and not one of them would come for me. You sent one message, and look at them come. This is the thing, is it not? This is the secret. This is why nobody has ever beaten you." "It is not a secret," I told him. "We tell everybody. Nobody fights alone. The rest of the galaxy just keeps thinking it is a threat, when it has always been an invitation. But ships arriving at dawn meant nothing if Sylara did not live to see the dawn, and for that, we needed a door into the most guarded place on the planet. Kret gave us one. Pale, shaking, and utterly determined, he pointed out that the plaza security for the execution was a joint operation, and that meant hegemony officers on the ground, and that meant a Kess soldier reporting for duty with valid codes would be waved through gates that no Vel-Nari or human could ever pass. His codes still worked. His squad had reported him lost, not captured. He could walk in the front door of the trap and be standing close to Sylara when everything began. "You understand what happens if you are discovered," I said. "The same thing that happens to her at dawn if I do nothing," he said. "You went back for me on that hull. You did not weigh it. You just came. Let me be the kind of person who just comes." I put my hand on his shoulder, this enemy child who had become something like a little brother in the space of 5 days, and I could not speak for a moment, so I just nodded, and that was enough for both of us. The last hours of that night I spent in a temple. The seamstress led me there through flooded alleys to a small crystal sanctuary in the old quarter where a priest with kind eyes and no questions let me sit in the dark among the singing stones. Vel-Nari temples hum, very softly, all through the night, the crystals breathing with the heat of the day they stored. It sounds like a choir heard from very far away. I sat under that sound with my rifle across my knees, and for the first time since my war ended, I let myself remember all of it, the faces, the names, the ones I saved and the ones I will meet again someday with apologies ready. I had spent 6 years believing I left the war because I was empty. Sitting there, I finally understood the truth. I had not been empty. I had been full of grief with nowhere to put it, and no reason strong enough to pick up the weight again. Now I had a reason. She had sunrise eyes and a stubborn chin and a habit of making soup for her enemies, and in a few hours, in front of 40 worlds, her own blood was going to raise a blade over her and call it justice. The priest sat beside me near the end of the night. He looked at my face for a long while, and then he said, in careful, gentle trade language, "Our books say your kind cannot be stopped. Tell me, human, is it true?" "Everything can be stopped," I told him honestly. "We just cost more than anyone has ever been willing to pay." Dawn came the color of fire. The plaza of the Crystal Throne, filled with 100,000 silent citizens, herded in to witness, ringed by soldiers, watched by hovering cameras that carried every image to 40 worlds. On the great balcony stood the hegemony delegation in their black formal armor, come to watch the last obstacle to their treaty removed. And on the high platform, beside the empty crystal throne of her dying father, they brought out Scylara. I watched from the shadows of a bell tower at the plaza's edge, and my hands were steady, and my heart was not. They had dressed her in white, the Vel Nari color of endings. Her wrists were bound in light. She was thinner, and there was a bruise on her silver cheek that put a sound in my throat I did not recognize as my own. But she walked with her head high, past her uncle, past the blade, to the appointed place, and she looked out over her people, not with fear but with love, and even bound and condemned, she was the only royal thing in that entire square. Chancellor Vorth spoke to the cameras about grief and duty and the heavy burden of justice, and he was good. He was so believably, horribly good, dabbing at his dry eyes while he reached for the ceremonial blade. He wanted to do it himself, for the cameras, for the treaty, for the story he was telling 40 worlds. He raised the blade into the dawn light, and every screen on the planet, every tower display, every camera feed, every device in every home, on every world of the Velnari Empire, flickered, went dark, and lit up again with a single enormous image, my face. Unshaven, gray at the temples, human as sin, filling the sky above that plaza 100 meters tall, and I heard 100,000 people take one breath at the same time, and I leaned into the pickup that Edith had spliced into the planetary network from orbit, exactly on schedule, and I smiled the smile my old squad used to call the bad news. "Good morning," I said, to Vorth, to the hegemony, to 40 worlds at once. "My name is Marcus Cole. You have something that belongs to the galaxy's decent people. I have come to collect, and before anyone reaches for a weapon, I would like to play you all a recording." The recording played across the sky of an entire world, and I watched an empire change its mind in real time. It was Vorth's own voice, pulled from the hegemony data core, crisp and clear and unmistakable, discussing the ambush of his niece's convoy with a Kess admiral, discussing routes he had provided, discussing payment, discussing in a bored, administrative tone that was somehow the worst part of all, how the princess should be sealed away rather than granted a quick ending, because he wanted no possibility of her body telling an inconvenient story. His voice rolled over the plaza like slow thunder, sentence after sentence, crime after crime, and 100,000 faces turned from the screens to the man on the platform, who stood frozen with the ceremonial blade still raised above his own brother's child, caught in the act in front of the entire empire, wearing the expression of a creature who has just felt the floor of the universe give way beneath him. For 3 full seconds, nobody on that planet moved. Then the plaza of the Crystal Throne made a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. It started low, one voice, then 100, then 100,000. Not a scream and not a cheer, but something older than both. The sound a people makes when a lie it has been forced to swallow comes back up all at once. The crowd surged against the barriers. The soldiers holding those barriers looked at the screens, looked at Vorth, looked at the bound princess in white, and I watched, actually watched, the exact moment their loyalty snapped like an old rope. An officer of the Royal Guard, gray with age and shaking with fury, turned to face the platform, drew his ceremonial saber, pointed it at the Chancellor, and roared a word my translator rendered simply as Oathbreaker. Vorth did what liars always do when the truth arrives. He screamed for violence. He commanded the guards to fire on the crowd, to cut the broadcast, to execute the prisoner immediately, his smooth voice tearing into something ragged and shrill, and not one soldier obeyed. Not one. He had built his entire plan on the belief that people follow whoever holds the throne, and he learned, in front of 40 worlds, that people follow whoever holds their trust. The hegemony delegation decided the treaty was over. They decided it all at once, in the practical way of their kind, and their commander barked the withdrawal order even as their honor guard closed around the balcony. Black armored soldiers began clearing a path toward their shuttles, and that was the moment everything on the platform broke loose at once, because Vorth, abandoned by his allies and his guards and his lie, grabbed the one card he had left. He grabbed Sylara. I was already moving. I had been moving since the recording started, down the bell tower stairs 4 at a time, through the service gate that Kret's codes had unlocked at first light, into the chaos of the plaza with my hood thrown back and no attempt at disguise at all. And here is a thing I will never forget as long as I live. The crowd saw me. 100,000 frightened, furious people saw a human striding through their midst with a rifle on his back, the nightmare of their scriptures come alive among them at the worst hour of their history, and they did not flee and they did not attack. They opened. They pulled each other aside and cleared a path from one end of that plaza to the other, a straight line pointing at the platform, and the ones nearest me bowed their heads as I passed, and from somewhere in that ocean of people a voice called out the old verse, the forgotten one, and 1,000 voices took it up like a tide. He comes for the guilty, for the innocent he stands. I climbed the platform steps into the ringing silence at the top. Vorth stood against the base of the great crystal chair, with Sylara pulled back against his chest, and the ceremonial blade trembling at her throat. Up close he was smaller than his broadcasts, thin and elegant and coming apart, his careful face slick with fear, his eyes darting between me and the crowd, and the departing hegemony shuttles rising into the morning like black birds leaving a fire. Kret stood 10 paces to his left, weapon drawn but frozen, unable to act with the blade where it was. Sylara's eyes found mine across the platform. There was no fear in them. There was, and I will swear this to my dying day, an apology, as though she was sorry I had to see her family like this, and something in my chest broke and mended in the same heartbeat. "Stay back," Vorth shrieked at me. "Not one step, human, not one, or she dies before your eyes." And I did the most frightening thing a human can do. I did nothing at all. I stopped. I stood easy. I let the rifle hang untouched on its strap, and I slid my hands into my pockets like a man waiting for a bus, and I looked at Chancellor Vorth of the Velnari with the flat, patient calm that 6 years of war carved into me, and I let him look back for as long as he could stand it. It took 9 seconds for the trembling in his blade hand to spread up his whole arm. "You will not reach me in time," he said, and the words wobbled. "Whatever your kind can do, you cannot cross 10 paces faster than I can move a blade." "That is true," I said, and my quiet voice carried across the whole silent plaza, because 100,000 people were holding their breath. "I cannot, so let us talk instead. Let me tell you what I know about you, Chancellor." And I talked, slow and level, never raising my voice, one step forward with every few sentences, so gradual, he did not register the ground disappearing between us. I told him he was not a killer, that a killer would have finished her on the convoy with his own hands instead of paying strangers and sealing doors. I told him that everything he had done, every scheme and every crime, had been about one thing only, saving his own skin, first from irrelevance, then from the hegemony, and now from this platform. I told him that the shuttles rising behind him were his allies leaving him with the bill, that the crowd below owned every exit, that his soldiers now answered to the woman at the end of his blade, and that the only unwritten page left in his story was how it ended. He could end it as a monster in front of 40 worlds. Or he could end it as a coward who surrendered, and cowards, I told him, at least live to grow old in a cell. But here is the thing I have learned about your people, I said, and I was 5 paces away now, close enough to see my reflection in the ceremonial blade. Your people plan everything. Doctrine and ceremony and contingency, every step written down before it is taken. So somewhere behind those clever eyes, Chancellor, you are searching your plans for the page that covers this moment. A tired human walking toward you with empty hands in front of the whole galaxy, and you are discovering that the page does not exist. Nobody wrote it. Nobody could, and that is why your hand is shaking and mine is not. His nerve broke exactly the way ice breaks, all at once and from the inside. The blade dipped, just a fraction, just a finger's width of despair, and that was all the universe owed us. Silara moved, not me, her. She had been waiting, my brilliant, patient, furious princess, reading her uncle's trembling through her own skin, and the instant the blade sagged she drove her heel down onto his foot, twisted out of his grip in a spin her ancestors would have recognized from 1,000 years of courtly dance, seized his wrist with both bound hands, and threw him over her hip and flat onto his back on the crystal floor of his stolen platform, in front of every camera on 40 worlds. The ceremonial blade clattered away spinning. Kret was on him before it stopped, pinning him with a knee and shaking so hard he could barely hold the restraints, and the sound that rose from the plaza of the crystal throne then was not a sound so much as a physical force, a wall of joy that I felt in my ribs like acceleration. I did not get to see Vorth taken away, because I was busy. Silara had turned and crossed the platform and thrown her still-bound arms over my head and around my neck, and buried her face against my shoulder in front of 100,000 of her subjects and every screen in her empire, and Protocol could file a complaint later. You came, she kept saying into my collar, her voice breaking on the words. You came, you actually came, and I held her upright and said the only thing there was to say, which was, of course I did, and above us, right on schedule, the morning sky filled with ships. 14 of them. The ugliest, bravest little fleet in the history of the galaxy, dropping through the clouds in loose formation, with their hulls scorched from a stunt I only heard about afterward, how Tanner and Edith and the Racing Brothers had spent the dawn hour flying circles around the entire hegemony escort squadron, jamming their sensors with mining charges and old parade fireworks and, in Edith's case, broadcasting polka music on their command channels at battle volume, sowing so much confusion that the withdrawing Kess fleet, convinced the humans had brought something terrible and secret, left the system at twice their rated speed without firing a shot. 14 freight haulers and hospital ships bluffed an armada, and to this day, hegemony intelligence reports classify Edith's polka broadcast as an unknown sonic weapon. She has it framed on her wall. What came after came quickly, the way water moves once a dam is gone. The recordings went to the noble houses before noon. The conspirators in the guard and the ministries were taken by their own colleagues before nightfall, most of them found already packing. The old emperor, roused from his sickbed by news that his daughter lived, outlasted every physician's prediction through sheer joy for 11 more days, long enough to hold her, long enough to thank me in a whisper I will keep private, and long enough to see her invested before the crystal throne as his heir with his own fading eyes. Vorth answered to Vel Nari justice, which turned out to be exactly what I told him it would be, a long lifetime in a comfortable cell with nothing to scheme for and nobody who would listen. Some fates are worse than the dramatic ones. Kret was pardoned by royal decree, the first Kess citizen in history granted Vel Nari protection, and then, because Silara understands people the way her uncle never did, he was given a job, liaison to the new Veterans Aid Station that her government funded in the lower city, where a certain baker brings bread every morning and a seamstress altered a uniform to fit a 19-year-old who finally stands up straight. He calls me every week. He still drinks his soup wrong, with the spoon backwards, and I have stopped correcting him because his letters home have started convincing other young Kess draftees that the hegemony stories about the galaxy are lies, and a boy doing that much good can hold his spoon however he likes. My people stayed a week. The palace tried to honor them with a formal banquet, and my beautiful disasters turned it into the loudest, warmest, least formal night that Throne World had seen in 1,000 years, with Ruth teaching royal courtiers a drinking song, Owen setting a duke's dislocated shoulder on the dance floor, and Tanner telling war stories that grew a full size with every telling. The Velnari watched humans celebrate the way you watch a thunderstorm from a warm porch, amazed that something so loud could feel so safe. When my friends finally lifted off for home, half the city came out to wave, and I stood on the landing platform with a lump in my throat, while 14 ships did one low, slow, deafening pass over the palace in the old missing man formation, wings dipped, for the ones who could not come. Then it was quiet, and it was just us, and there was the matter of a question she had been waiting a full week to ask. She asked it in her mother's garden, in the evening, with the singing glass sea glowing far below the walls. She was wearing plain clothes, no crown, no crest, just Silara, and she took both my scarred hands in her silver ones, the way she had done that night on my dead, drifting ship, and she asked me to stay. Not as a guard, she said, not as a legend, not as the death that walks, not as a story for her people's books, as Marcus. She said the throne came with a place beside it that no law had ever named, because no one had ever imagined the need, and that she intended to be an empress, famous for doing unimaginable things, starting immediately, if a certain stubborn human could ever learn to stand beside someone instead of in front of them. I am told that the salvage business runs on knowing the worth of things, on looking at what everyone else calls wreckage, and seeing what can be saved. 6 years I had drifted through the dark buying and selling the bones of finished stories, so sure that mine was one of them, and then a scanner screamed over a heartbeat that should not have been there, and I cut through a sealed door, and everything I thought was over turned out to be waiting to begin. I said yes. Obviously, I said yes. Her people's holy books call my kind the death that walks, and for a long time I hated it, because I have walked with death enough for 10 lifetimes, and I know it is nothing to sing about. But the temples have restored the second verse now, the one the war years buried, and the priest with the kind eyes read it to me himself, in that little crystal sanctuary where I once sat all night with my grief and my rifle. He comes for the guilty, for the innocent he stands. And I understand it now, what the old writers were trying to warn the galaxy about, the thing that every empire keeps learning at full price and forgetting at its leisure. It was never our anger. It was never our endurance, our stubbornness, our impossible luck. It is simply this: when something helpless cries out in the dark, everything else in the universe calculates the odds first. We just come. Silara asked me once, back when she was a terrified stranger bleeding in my cargo hold, why I had saved her when I owed her nothing and stood to gain less. I gave her some tired joke about hating people who hurt the wounded, because the true answer was too big for me then, and I had not yet earned it back. I have earned it now. I whisper it to her every night in a palace above a singing sea, and I will write it here at the end, so that anyone who finds this story knows exactly how it goes. Because nobody fights alone, because that is just what we do.